for the hastening of the return of our 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjah, one salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. My dear brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First off, let me say it is an honor to be here with you tonight. And as we continue in this commemoration of the tragedy of Karbala, it's really a blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, that although we are gathered for such a sorrowful event as the tragedy of Karbala, and not just the tragedy of Karbala, but obviously as a community we continue to mourn, not only the day of Ashura, but all the way to Arba'een. And it's a tragic sorrow event, but it is also a way in that Allah has given us this opportunity to gather together as a community of believing brothers and sisters, and to partake in this spiritual banquet that Abu Abdullah alayhi salam has left for us. And indeed, this is greater than probably any school or madrasa or university that we could go to. Just the fact that we have this blessing to be able to commemorate the tragedy and to remember and to learn from the various individuals who we listen to their lectures. Inshallah, for the next 4 nights that I'm with you, I want to try and dissect this topic and try to bring a better understanding in our lives of the concept of the dua, of the supplication. And as I've entitled this series, The Physics of the Supplication, and how to use, specifically because we'll be commemorating the martyrdom of the 4th Imam, Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I want to focus on the supplications of our 4th Imam. As we know, he has a beautiful compendium of supplications known as the Sahifat al-Sajjadiyah. It's a beautiful book of about 54 supplications, some munajat. And inshallah, I want to only look at 3 different du'as over the course of these nights to see what the actual role of the dua is in our lives. Tonight, however, I just want to begin an introduction about the theoretical aspect of the dua. How do du'as work in our lives? We live in very complex times. We live in a very challenging era. We know that at one level we have many difficulties at a personal level. We go through marital issues. We go through challenges of upbringing our children in these secular societies. We go through troubles of paying our bills, of paying our mortgages, covering our debts. We go through so many problems and difficulties in life. And many times people say, well, where is the answer? Where do we get support from Allah? On another level, we go through challenging times because of the geopolitical landscape. We see that Muslims especially are under the attack around the globe, not only by non-Muslim secular governments, but even unfortunately by so-called Muslim governments, and especially us as the followers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, we are unfortunately at the brunt of a lot of the aggression against the Muslim community. And again, many times we ask ourselves that where is Allah, right? What do we do to be able to resolve the challenges that we face? Obviously we have physical, we have things that we can do at a physical level, but we will look in this topic of the dua and to see how we can tap into the metaphysical, into the creator of the universe, Allah, to see what tricks, what tips, what guidance He gives us within the context of the supplication. So let me begin first by introducing what the dua is and how the duas, the mechanics, the physics of the duas work within our lives. We use this word dua, an Arabic word, and we try in English to translate it as supplication. Literally this word, when we try to understand what does it mean to make a dua, to call upon. Literally this dua means to call upon somebody. It could mean to call upon a friend, for example. It's used in the Quran in multiple ways. For example, in the Quran when Nabi Nuh, Prophet Noah, peace be upon him, is talking to Allah, and Allah quotes him in the Quran. Nabi Nuh says, "Inni da'awtu qawmi laylan wa naharan." Indeed, I invited my community day and night. So Nabi Nuh used the same word dua. He used it in the verbal form, meaning to call or to invite his community to Islam. And Allah uses this word dua in multiple different ways. Allah uses it for us to call upon Him. So He says, "Ud'uni astajib lakum," call upon me, I will answer you. He uses it for prophets calling their community to the path of Tawheed. So we see this used in many different ways, but when we look at the definition that we want to reflect upon and we want to drill into, the dua or the supplication is when we call upon a higher being, meaning Allah. We call upon this supreme being in a humble way, that we are at a level of utter poverty, that we have nothing, and we call upon Allah to provide us for all of our needs. That's literally what a dua is. When we look at the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, and I focus on them obviously not only because we are their followers, but really when you look at the world of Islam, the Prophet and his noble family are the only ones who have left behind I would say a priceless legacy in the ways of the du'as. You look at the yearly du'as, we gather once a year on the 9th of Dhul Hijjah for the du'a of Arafat, right? We have two different versions. We have the one of the fourth Imam, and we also have the one of Sayyid al-Shuhada, which we more commonly recite. So we have a yearly gathering where we gather in dua. At another level, at the level of the month, we have different a'mal, different acts of worship, different supplications for the beginning of every lunar month. So Muharram begins, for example. It began 3 weeks ago. Rasulullah would make a beautiful dua where he would address Allah and tell Allah that you are the, as he says, Ilahun Qadim. You are the eternal Lord. And then Rasulullah would say that Hadihi Sanatun Jadida, that this is a new year. And then Rasulullah would ask Allah for a few things. Just like we have New Year's resolutions within the secular culture, Rasulullah would ask Allah for what I would term a New Year's resolution from the religious perspective. So at a monthly level, we have these du'as. Then we get to the weekly level, we see that Thursday night is the night of dua. Many of our communities, we recite dua kumail on a Thursday night. Friday, tomorrow is the day of, obviously, the day of the gathering. We have the Friday prayers. We have dua nudba. And then obviously we have not only that, but it gets to the level of so much granularity that we even have du'as for every hour of the day. So just like, Big Ben chimes every hour and you hear that noise if you're in downtown London, we have a dua for 12 o'clock, for 1 o'clock, for 2 o'clock. Different dhikr, adhkar to recite, different supplications to recite. Right? So we have this blessing within us that we have been given all of these supplications for so many different times of the day, for difficulties, for challenges that we face. In short, we have this blessing, but the challenge comes is that how do we make use of it? It's a tool. Just like you have a hammer or a screwdriver and they're tools. And you use a specific tool at a certain time. Right? If you're making cookies in the kitchen, you're not going to use a hammer. You'd use a cookie cutter. Right? If you're going to put a nail into the wall, you wouldn't use your blender. You'd use the hammer. I look at du'as in a similar way that we have all of these supplications. Some of them are universal du'as, but others are very specific for certain things. And that's where we will look at in these 3 nights some specific supplications to address our life in this era and in these societies that we're living in. But one of the first things that we mention is that we have to keep in mind is, and people sometimes ask, well, we learn in madrasa, we learn from the scholars that Allah is Al-Alim. He knows everything. Allah is, eternal. He knows everything. He doesn't have to be reminded of things. So why do we have du'as in our life? Why do we gather to recite a du'a if we believe, as Allah says in the Quran, that نَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ, that we are closer to you than your jugular vein? Why do we even bother with a du'a? Why don't we just say, well, Allah knows what I want, it's running through my head. Why do I have to sit at a certain time or in a certain direction facing Qibla with wudu, with all of those prerequisites, and physically and verbally ask Allah? He knows everything. Why bother with all of those formalities? And we can also ask, and I'll try to answer some of these questions in this majlis tonight, that if Allah did not give it to me already, why do I want to demand something from Allah? If Allah didn't give me wealth, why do I ask Him every day for wealth? If He didn't give me, let's say, children, I've been married for 10 years, no children, why do I continue to ask Him? If He knew it was good for me, He would automatically give it to me. But yet we see that we've been encouraged, we've actually been ordered in the Quran to continue to make dua to Allah. In fact, I'll just give you 2 examples as we move on. That the hadith tell us that when it comes to du'as, don't limit it. Right? Don't limit it only to £1 million I want, or I want a spouse or children or a big house or a nice car. The hadith says that even ask Allah for something as trivial as the salt that you put on your food. Even the hadith says, even your shoelaces, ask Allah dua for your shoelaces. Because the hadith says if Allah wants to deprive you and I from those simple things, He can deprive us of those things. The moral of the story at this level, first off, is that we should always maintain a connection to Allah. Don't think it's something too trivial to ask Allah. Just the fact that we are opening up and speaking to Allah, and let me just say this, it doesn't have to be in Arabic. Right? It's good to speak the du'as in Arabic because this is how the Prophet and the Imams taught us. But we also need to realize we need to know what we say to Allah. So if we don't know the dua of Kumail in Arabic, read the English until you can learn the Arabic. Or read it in Urdu, or Gujarati, or French, or whatever language you're comfortable in. The point being is that we have to know what we're saying to Allah. If we don't know the language, I won't say it won't benefit, but it has lesser of an impact. And we'll see this unfold in the lectures that I'll deliver, that du'as are not just a metaphysical realization that things will be given to us, but we see that du'as actually become ways to build ourselves, to actually change our outlook on life. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So let me begin with this. What is the philosophy of the dua? When we look at the world that we live in and how Allah created it and how it is being maintained and sustained on a second-by-second basis, we have to realize that we're not only limited to the physical world. Right? Yes, we're physical beings. As human beings, we have this body. Right? We have physical things around us. We have trees, we have animals, we have the planets, we have the solar system. But deep within the human being, obviously, we have a spiritual aspect. We have the soul, this ruh that Allah has breathed into us. And so human beings, we are a combination of the soul and the body. And when we look at it in that way, we realize, and although science might not accept the concept of a soul, but we have to realize that there is something about the human being that is not just physical. Because if you've ever seen somebody who's passed away, or you've been given the ghusl to a dead body, it's a physical body. But what makes it different from you who are standing alive in front of it? Right? It could have been younger than you. It could have been more healthier. It could have had, many more unique qualities than we have. But there's something different about that body, right? And we would say that that's the soul that has been removed from that connection between the body and the soul. And so when we look at it at one level, that we see that we're not just a physical body, that we're also a metaphysical, a immaterial aspect of the soul, we realize that this world is not just run on the physics or on the physical realities of the world. So yes, there's for example, there's gravity. There's all of these different things that are running this universe and the way that we live. There's the rules of cause and effect in the physical world. Similarly, at the spiritual level, there's also a cause and effect realization that we have. Give you an example that we have. You may have a person who is extremely fit. They watch what they eat. They exercise on a regular basis. They don't smoke. They don't drink. They don't do any of the bad things. And that person might die at the age of 35. But then you have somebody who was a chronic smoker. You know, they were just a pack a day. Maybe they drank. Maybe they engaged in reckless behavior. And they might live to be 100 years old. What happened there? You would think that the healthy person would live for, you know, if not forever, for 100 years, and the other person might have a very short lifespan. And so if you look at it from the physical perspective, well, you would say, well, this doesn't make sense. He's a healthy person. How did he die at such a young age, what we call a natural death? Right? And that, what we call this natural death, we realize that there's something beyond this material physical world. Right? And we realize that Allah has destined each and every one of us in this room and every human being to live a certain lifespan. And as Allah says in the Quran, that when our time comes, فَإِذَا جَاءَ أَجَلُهُمْ لَا يَسْتَأْخِرُونَ سَاعَةً وَلَا يَسْتَقْدِمُونَ. You can't hasten your death, nor can you delay it. It's written. Right? So certain things we have to realize are not only in the physical realm. There is a higher realization, what we call Allah, what is God. And certain things are determined by Him. And so when we look at even the dua, we have to realize that that is one of the mechanics of the dua. That is not just about the physical world, that I go to work, I get my paycheck, I get money. No, there's more behind it. There's more behind the scenes than just what you and I can physically perform. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And so one of the things that we have to appreciate that, yes, at one level, certain things of our life are destined to happen. Right? People, and this is a large theological debate amongst the Muslims and maybe even humanity. Because as we know, some Muslims believe that everything that happens to us as human beings has been foretold by Allah. You know, everything is written in destiny. Who you'll marry, how many children you'll have, how much money you'll make, all of these things some Muslims believe, even to the point of if you will sin, some Muslims believe that no, Allah has forewritten that you will commit a certain sin on a certain day. And obviously when we look at the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim as-salam, we reject that notion. Because yes, there is a limit to our predestination, but at the same time, Allah has given you and I free will. Right? So people will ask, well, what is predestined for us? And what is the free will? Where do we draw the line? Right? An example is our birth. None of us in this room could have told Allah when we were in the previous world of existence in what family we wanted to be born into. So certain people, certain souls are born into a Muslim family, some are born into a Hindu family, some are born into a Christian family. No soul had the ability in the pre-worldly existence to determine where they wanted to be born. That was preordained by Allah. Similarly, at the end of our life, to a great extent, you and I cannot control when, where, or how we will die. To an extent, I will say, because there is some flexibility in death. We can actually change our day of death, but ultimately the actual end of our life where there is no change, Allah has already written that this person, I will allow them to come onto earth. They will live for 30 years or 50 years or 80 years or 100 years, but that's it. No matter how healthy you eat, no matter how much science can progress, no matter if science can get to the level of cryogenics where they can freeze the body and bring you back to life, ultimately the Malakul Maut will come and take your soul. Nobody can change that. But everything in the middle, what education you will get, how much money you will earn, who you will marry, these are all in our hands, right? And sometimes, unfortunately, in our communities, we use Allah as the scapegoat. We'll say, well, I couldn't get married, Allah didn't want it to happen, right? And we have to realize that Allah doesn't control the minor tweaks of our life. We play that role. We have to take responsibility for our own lives. And again, we will see this through the discussion that there is some control that Allah has, because He doesn't just leave us on earth alone without His control, but we can't relegate every single action or everything that happens to be that Allah did it to us. We also need to, as human beings and as Muslims, to take on the responsibility that we are sometimes responsible, or many times are responsible for what happens within our lives. But you'll say, well, okay, if certain things are in the control of Allah, certain things are preordained, well then, how does the dua fit into all of this? As I said, the part of our life where we have control is how we lead our lives. Even though in there we can say there is a level of predestination, you and I know that we have times in the year where Allah gives us an opportunity to rewrite our destiny. So as I said a few minutes ago, that death is preordained. But at the same time, we have things like charity, like sadaqah, where if you give charity, you can prolong your life. We have, for example, Laylatul Qadr in the month of Ramadan, where we gather and make du'as. We put the Quran on our head, we go through all those acts of worship, because we're told that Laylatul Qadr khayrun min alfi shahr. This night of Qadr, this night of power or grandeur or the night of decree, can change our destiny for the next year to come. The 15th of Sha'ban, another night where we can change our destiny. So although certain things might be fixed, they're at a level where you can still edit them, right? It's like your computer or your phone. You have a document and you're working on your document. You can go and lock that document so you can't make any changes on it. Or you can go and unlock it, edit it, change it, copy and paste, change your file, and then save it. Du'as are like that, where there is a document written, but Allah then allows you and I to make changes to that document throughout the year. And so when we have this opportunity to make du'as, whether it be again on a yearly, on a monthly, on a weekly, on a daily basis, we have to make the most usage of that time and ask Allah for not only goodness of this world, but what would be good for me for this world and the world to come. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Let me go through a few theological questions that will maybe come up into our minds or have come up, or things that we've thought about again the mechanics of the du'as. Again, this is just the introduction to the upcoming 3 discussions and the specifics that I want to look at. But one of the questions that comes up is that dua goes against the fact that we should be pleased with whatever Allah has done for us, whatever Allah has given to us. We always hear this, have this ridayat, be content with what Allah has given. Why do we make dua? We should say, well, Allah has given me a job that pays me this much. I should be content with it. We should say, Allah has allowed me to get married. I haven't had children for this amount of years. I should just be content with it. Why am I trying and forcing Allah to change? Why am I trying to force change upon Allah? If He wanted to give it to me, He could have given any of these things to me. And so some people think that dua means that you're not happy with the state that you're in and you demand a change from Allah. And actually what we have to realize at the first level as a response to this is that the dua literally is an act of ibadat, it's an act of worship. So just as we pray our 5 daily prayers, we give khums, we go for hajj, we do all of these acts, these are acts of ibadat, acts of worship. Dua is also an act of worship. So even if we didn't ask anything from Allah, we didn't say we want this, this and this, and just look at dua kumail. Right? There's no mention, or maybe at the very end there's a little bit of a mention, but other than that, there's no mention in dua kumail about Allah give me wealth, give me knowledge, give me health. There's nothing in the dua of kumail about worldly benefit. It's all about confessing our sins, about getting closer to Allah. And so at level 1 we have to realize that the dua is a form of worship of Allah. And it's something that Allah wants us to do, not because He needs it, but because we need Allah. Because we need to keep in that constant touch and communication with Allah, He's given us an opportunity. So for example, in chapter 25, Surah Al-Furqan, in verse number 77, Allah has a very beautiful verse and He says, قُلْ مَا يَعْبَأُ بِكُمْ رَبِّي لَوْلَا دُعَاؤُكُمْ. He tells Rasulullah to make this commandment to you and I. Say to the people, O Rasul, that what would my Lord have any concern or care for you were it not for your du'as. Meaning that Allah is saying that, if you didn't, we have no worth, literally the verse is saying, we have no worth, no intrinsic value with Allah, except for the fact that we have a constant communication and a communion with Allah. And so we have to look at dua as a way to communicate, to speak to Allah, even if it's not about asking anything. Right? It's like us if we have children and they go away to university and maybe they're in a different city. They might not necessarily need anything from us, but they'll just call to say salam, to ask how we're doing, to inquire about the parents. Not that Allah needs it at that level, but at the minimal is just that we keep that constant touch with Allah. And I think at that level it helps us because it gives us that strength that there is somebody out there who, when everybody else will turn their backs on us, that there's one individual, Allah, who would never forget us, that He would never turn His back from us, that He is always available for you and I to communicate and speak to. And so at the first level, we have to realize that dua doesn't mean that we're not happy with what Allah has destined. We have to look at the du'as as a way of communication to Allah and a way to change our own outlook of the world around us. The second thing that people ask is that, again, if we are only going to get what Allah had predestined for us, then why bother with the du'as? We're only going to make so much money in our lives. We're only going to have certain things in our life. Why bother with the dua? And my response, and the response of our scholars, is actually that the dua is a way for us to capacity build, to build ourselves, to give us a greater ability to accept more from Allah. Now let me give you a practical example. This glass of water can only hold maybe 10 or 12 ounces, right? If you were to come with a 2-liter jug of water and you tried to pour it in there, it would overflow and it would spill onto the ground. Could you come and say it's the fault of the water? That it's the water's fault that it can't fit into that glass? Of course not. You'll say it's the glass's fault. The glass is too small. Bring me a bigger glass, I can pour more water into it. Our scholars explain the dua in that way, that when we make dua and we're sincere and we understand what we're saying and we focus and we trust in Allah and we have tawakkul in Allah and we believe in the oneness and the tawheed of Allah, we are engaging in what they call shar al-sadr. In the verse I began with from Surah Taha, the dua of Prophet Musa, Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri. He asked for an expansive heart. It didn't mean an open heart surgery and Allah would make his physical heart bigger. No, this expansion of the heart is a spiritual term that means that Allah, allow me to benefit more from your blessings, from your bounties, from your grace. So if we understand dua in that way, that dua is something that can expand my spiritual heart, that when I'm ready to get more blessings from Allah, then there'll be enough room in it, just like this glass of water. If we have a bigger glass, more water can fit into it. The dua is the same. It expands our hearts that we can accept more from Allah. Right? There are some people who get married and the husband or the wife, either one, I don't want to pick on one of the genders, but one of them doesn't have the capacity to bear children. Meaning that, if they have children, they're going to be harsh with them, they're going to be maybe violent, they're going to be very abusive to their children because they haven't developed the patience, the tolerance to bring children up. Maybe Allah delays that conception, that the woman cannot conceive until one of those two partners can develop that trait within themselves that when the child comes into the world, that spouse or both of them are now ready to bring that child up. Maybe that's why sometimes Allah delays it. Maybe, for example, we're looking for more money in our lives and we're not making more. It's difficult to make ends meet. And we make dua, Ya Allah, let me get a job that has this much money, or let me come into a jackpot of some way so I can get more money. But maybe we don't have the spiritual capacity to bear that much money. God forbid we get the money and we go towards sin. We go towards ruining our akhirat. All for a few dollars or a few pounds. It reminds me of this article I read in one of the British newspapers just a few weeks ago about this Muslim who won the very first lottery ticket in the UK. I think he won 18 or 20 million pounds about 20 years ago. You could probably Google the article online. Married man with a wife and 2 beautiful children. He won 20 million pounds. He couldn't bear it. He started going towards the haram, towards alcohol, towards all of these evils. He lost his wife, he lost his children. Eventually he died a few years ago in London or somewhere in England. And he's buried now in a grave. And that money ruined his life. Right? First of all, it was haram, obviously. Lotto, we know that lottery money is haram. It's a form of gambling. But the point was he didn't have the capacity to use that money. Now imagine if you or I are asking for Allah for halal rizq, but we don't have the capacity to keep away from sins. We may get that money and start spending it on the haram, on going to places, on looking at things, on drinking and eating things that are not allowed for us because we haven't developed the spiritual maturity to benefit from that blessing of Allah. So when we make dua and it doesn't get answered, it's because we don't have maybe that spiritual ability to actually benefit from that. So that's number 2 to keep in mind, is that the dua will help you and I develop that inner capacity to accept more of Allah's blessings upon us. And number 3 is, and I'll end with this, is that sometimes the du'as are not automatically accepted. Unfortunately, we live in a world which is a culture, a society of instant gratification, right? If you are old enough to remember cameras before they were digital, when you had film, right? You had to go and buy the film, you loaded it in your camera, you took your 12 or 24 photos, you took the film out, you took it to get developed, you waited a week for your photos, and then you see the pictures. We don't have that kind of tolerance and patience today. Right? And that's why all of our smartphones have cameras, so we can take selfies, and we can post them on Instagram instantaneously, get likes on Facebook, and people give us the thumbs ups, and we get all that happiness immediately. We live in a society of instant gratification. We want our fast food, we want our fast internet, we want everything fast on the spot. We have 3G, we want 4G, now 5G connectivity is coming down the line. We want everything right away. And sometimes people say, well, du'as, I made a du'a, why did it not get accepted immediately from Allah? He can do it, can't he? He can accept the du'a and fulfill it immediately. I can order a pizza and have it Uber delivered right away, so why can't Allah give my du'as right away? And it's a valid question, but we have to understand the mechanics, again, of the du'a and the mechanics of the world that we live in, of the spiritual realm. And so let me give us, as I conclude, a hadith from the 4th Imam, Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salatu wassalam. Where he answers this question, because Allah says in the Quran, Ud'uni astajib lakum, call upon me and I will answer you. And this is a theme in the Quran many times. At one level, and let me just mention this as a side point, is that just like any act of worship in Islam, the dua has prerequisites. Right? We stood for Jamaat prayers just about an hour ago. We had prerequisites. We had to wait for the time of the prayers to start. We had to be in a state of purity with wudu or tayammum or ghusl, whatever our responsibility was. We had to face a particular direction with all of these prerequisites. Dua is the same, right? Dua, we have, and I won't go into them tonight, but we have a book in English called Uddat al-Da'i by Ibn Fahd al-Hilli. It's a beautiful book. It's available in English, where he talks about the etiquette of the dua. What do you do before, during, after the dua for it to be a better chance of being accepted by Allah? We have to realize that the dua has prerequisites, right? Allah tells us in the Quran, for example, In a beautiful verse that وَإِذَا سَلَكَ إِبَادِي أَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ, he tells Rasulullah that tell my servants when they ask you about me that إِنِّي قَرِيب, that I am close. أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ, that I answer the call of the supplicant when they call upon me. But then Allah has a caveat, He has a condition. It's not a blanket statement. Allah doesn't just say that call upon me and I'll answer you. He has a condition. He says, فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي وَيُؤْمِنُوا بِي. He says, let those servants of mine answer my dua, my call, and believe in me. So we have to ask ourselves that when we make dua to Allah, have we answered Allah's call? Allah made a dua to us. Allah called upon us. He wants us to do the halal, do the permissible. Eat the halal, don't eat the haram food. He says you can use your ears to listen, but why are you listening to the haram music? Why are you listening to the ghibat, people talking about other people in the community? He gave us two eyes, that we can look at the nature around us, that we can drive our cars, that we can look at our parents, that we can look at our spouse, we can look at our children. But He didn't give us two eyes to go on social media and look at girls without hijab. He didn't give us two eyes to go to the beach and look at people inappropriately dressed. This was the dua of Allah. Answer the call of Allah. He gave us a tongue to speak with, but then He also put teeth in the front and lips, so we would think 4 times before we speak. But if we don't do it, then we haven't answered the call of Allah. And if I haven't answered the call of Allah, why do I expect Him to answer my call? Right? It just makes sense. If Allah says, I just want you to do a few little things. And you know, sometimes youth tell me, well, this religion is hard. I can't eat certain foods. I can't go to certain places. I can't listen to certain things. And it is a difficult religion, no doubt. I couldn't sit here and say that Islam is easy, because it's not. It's a difficult religion to follow. And we have certain dietary restrictions. We have certain things we can't look at, certain things we can't listen to. But if we were to sit and analyze and think about the social problems happening in society today, we would realize that all of the things that Allah said are haram are there for our own benefit. Right? I'm sure you followed this hashtag that came out last October, the Me Too hashtag, about women being molested in the workplace, about women having advances upon them that they didn't want, that they weren't requesting. Allah told us 1400 years ago in the Quran that men and women should not be in a secluded room together. Allah said, men and women, you can have a professional relationship, but no physical contact. Even a handshake, not allowed. Right? All of that was there 14 years ago. Why? You know, what was the reason? Is Allah doesn't want us to, you know, enjoy life? No, He says, marry from the opposite gender, have a relationship within the confines of religion. Today, 1400 years later, we see women who are protesting that men are using their power, their authority to get benefits from the women, and they have that hashtag of Me Too. Well, if they had followed Islam, if we had followed Islam, then we wouldn't be in that predicament today. So we see that there's a wisdom. People say, well, what about alcohol? Right? Studies will come and say it's good to drink a bit of wine every day. Maybe you read these studies in major newspapers and research. And they will come with all of this medical research to drink some amount of alcohol daily is a benefit. Allah told us in the Quran that that's true. When the Muslims would come to Rasulullah, they would ask the Prophet about 2 particular things in the verse. And the verse says, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ. They ask you, O Prophet, about khamar, intoxicants, like alcohol, like drugs, and maysir. Maysir is games of chance, like gambling, casinos, lottery tickets. And Rasulullah was told, Allah told the Prophet, say to them that in these 2 things there is a benefit for people and there is a sin. And Allah says, and the sin far outweighs the benefit. So there's no doubt you could go to your corner store and buy a lottery ticket for £1 and win 15 million pounds. No doubt there's a benefit. But what are the chances you'll win? You just read stories online. Again, go into Google and read stories about people who have gone to casinos. They've lost the money in their pocket. They'd go back, they'd mortgage their car, mortgage their home. I read in an article in Las Vegas in America, a man lost his money, his home, his car. No jokes, he gambled off his wife. He lost the bet. His wife is now the property of another man to do whatever he wants with. That's the level that people get to because we can't control ourselves in certain areas. Had he won the jackpot, it would have been great maybe in terms of the physical. But again, at the metaphysical level, there's damage, there's harm in it. And so we have to realize that the du'as, sometimes they are not accepted because of certain reasons. Let me come to the hadith and we'll conclude for tonight. The fourth Imam, when he talked about why our du'as are not automatically answered, he says that the mu'min, the believing man or believing woman, they're in three different states when it comes to du'as. We make a du'a to Allah. He says three outcomes, one of the three outcomes can manifest from that du'a. The first thing he says is that the du'a is obviously heard by Allah, right? We made the du'a fulfilling the conditions, we accepted the call of Allah, Allah accepted the du'a, but the Imam says Allah will delay the actual realization of that du'a. Allah would store it, either in the world to come, in the akhirat, in which case it would be given much better than what we wanted now, or Allah will say, okay, this person doesn't have that expansive heart yet, I'll wait till they're ready, and then I'll grant it to them. I had an individual tell me one time that he made a dua. He didn't tell me exactly what the dua was, but he made a dua. He made the dua sincerely from the bottom of his heart. He fulfilled all the criteria as much as he could as a human being. He told me it took 8 years for that dua to materialize. 8 years he waited for one dua to actually come to fruition, to realize what he made that dua for. Right? And it wasn't because Allah couldn't do it. Allah could have, done it immediately. Kun fayakun. But that person had to develop the inner capacity to fulfill what he was asking Allah for. Right? Allah can do anything. He can do anything, but He wants us to go through the challenges of life and get to the conclusion and get to that outcome on our own. To feel what, to experience the struggles and the pain and the hardship, and then to give victory. Right? Look at the battles of the Prophet. Allah could have helped them. He helped them in Badr when they were successful, outnumbered 3-1. But in Uhud they were losers. Right? Allah could have accepted the dua of the Prophet. Right? Look at Karbala. From the outward perspective, people say, well, Sayyid al-Shuhada was not victorious because he was killed. But we understand it in the opposite way, that it's not about the military battle, it's about the long-term effect. He could have made dua and Allah would have sent angels or the jinn to come and help, and the angels actually came to him. And they said, we want to help you. And he said, I don't need your help. I'm going to let this run through in a natural way. So the fourth Imam says, number one is that it is stored for you, either in the world to come or later on you might get it. Number two, he says, is that Allah will give it to you immediately. Like right away, not on the spot, but He'll get it very soon. And sometimes we might see this where we make a dua and maybe within a few days or weeks, it comes true. Right? Thank Allah that He accepted that dua and it was something beneficial, and so He granted it to us. The third one is beautiful. The third one, the Imam says that Allah accepts the dua, so He hears it, He accepts it, He acknowledges it, but Allah says, I'm going to give you something different in its place. And the hadith says that I'm going to prevent a bala, a calamity, a tragedy from coming upon you. So maybe sometimes you've experienced this. You're coming home from London, let's say on the motorway, and you're very tired, you're half asleep, and you fall asleep at the wheel. And you're about to run into another car, and something happens and you wake up right away. And you think to yourself, wow, I'm lucky, I saved myself. If this hadith is accurate, and it is accurate because our scholars have quoted it, that saving that we had when we almost had an accident was the fact that we made a dua at some time, and Allah said, I'm going to protect you. You might come across a difficulty. I'm going to save you in that time. And that dua was it was manifest in your salvation. Maybe you go swimming in the ocean and you're about to drown and you get saved. It's not because you were there was a fluke and a wave came and pulled you out. It's that you made a dua at some time in your life and Allah protected you from that calamity through a dua that was completely different than what you had ever asked for. So let me conclude with that. Just keep that dua, that hadith in our mind when we make duas every time. Allah may give it to you now. He may delay it for the akhirat, in which case we'll see so much more blessings. Or you may come across a point in your life where you may have had an accident. Some disaster might have hit you or your family and you're prevented from it. And that was not a fluke, that was Allah's hand helping us in that time. And if we understand what I've mentioned tonight in terms of the physics of the dua, inshallah, as we continue tomorrow night when we look at one of the du'as of our fourth Imam, we'll be in a better position to understand the workings of the dua. And that it's not just about asking Allah for Him to change the dynamics of the world, but it's going to be about us re-understanding and looking at the world in a different way, in a unique way, that we would be able to change ourselves and we would be able to actually become better people and get what we want, but through our own efforts and through our own self-sacrifices. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Let me conclude tonight with just a few words of Masa'ib about the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, because that is, again, the importance of this month of Muharram and this commemoration that we have. And as I've pretty sure that we all know that the tragedies did not end on the day of Ashura. Yes, the battle might have ended on the day of Ashura. The bodies may have been scattered on the plains of Karbala. The blood-stained sand of Karbala may have seen all that tragedy on the day of Ashura. But we know that the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam suffered far beyond the day of Ashura. They suffered so much untold hardships. They suffered so much difficulty and tragedy that we can only begin to imagine what the tragedies were like. Brothers and sisters, let us go back to those tragic days and nights after the day of Ashura. Eventually, as we know that after Sayyid al-Shuhada had given his life, as he was the last one to give his life on the day of Ashura, and as the bodies had been laying on the desert plains, after the bodies had been decapitated, after all that disrespect had been meted out to the bodies, eventually on the 12th of Muharram, on the day after the Shama Ghariba, as they were, Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, were forced to walk through the blood-stained plains of Karbala, as they eventually made it towards the city of Kufa, that this was a city, brothers and sisters, that Amir al-Mu'mineen had been the governor, based his governorship of the Muslim Ummah for 4 years. This was a city where Lady Zainab alayhi salam had been known to the women as a commentator of the Quran. This was a city where people would say that they had never even seen the shadow of Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, let alone see her face or hear her voice. But eventually, as they made their way to the city of Kufa, they see the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. They see the heads of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. They see Lady Zainab alayhi salam. They see Imam Sajjad walking through the city of Kufa with the chains on his ankles, the chains on his hands. They realize that this is something that they were not expecting to happen. Eventually, brothers and sisters, as the caravan spends 3 or 4 days in the city of Kufa, they're given the order by Yazid, who's in Sham, for the Ahlul Bayt to be brought to the city of Sham. And as they begin that journey of over 2,000 kilometers, as they begin that journey, as the hadith mentions and as the books of history mention, that it was not an easy journey for the Ahlul Bayt to take. It was such a difficult journey. If we can only imagine the way the historians paint us this picture, they say that the women and the children, that they were put onto the backs of camels, they were put onto the backs of donkeys, but these were animals that didn't even have a saddle on them. We can only imagine, for those who have been on an animal without a saddle, you know how it feels to go a few feet. Imagine traveling thousands of kilometers in the desert heat in this particular way. The books of history mention that as they had tied the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, they mentioned that the fourth Imam had a collar around his neck, They mentioned that his hands were in chains, but his hands weren't in chains no near his side. They mentioned that his hands were chained to his neck as well. And that they say that the collar was such that there were spikes in the collar pointing inwards into the neck of the Imam. The Imam had chains on his ankles, and those were tied to his hands. We can only imagine how the Imam would have gone on the camel in that way, how he would have walked all the way from that long distance in the heat of the desert, seeing all of those, reliving all those tragedies of the day of Ashura, seeing the heads of his father and the family and companions in front of him, one after the other, and seeing the women and children being forced to walk in this way and to being hit with the spears and the whips and the arrows, and as they were going all the way from Kufa towards the cursed city of Sham. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ إِنَّ لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. We ask Allah, بِحَقِّ Fatima and her father and her husband and her two sons, that Allah accept this act of worship from us tonight. We ask Allah to allow us to understand the teachings of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask Allah to allow us, to give us the ability to make dua to Allah. We ask Allah to give us the goodness of this dunya and the goodness of the akhirat. We ask Allah to keep us all on the path of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, and to allow us to see the time of the dhuhur of our 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjah. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
ماطم حسين.
يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين.